Finding love can often lead to unexpected paths, but for Sheila Davalu, it became a dangerous obsession. As a talented pharmaceutical researcher, Sheila appeared to have a bright future ahead. However, her relationship took a dark turn when she became entangled in a love triangle with her coworker, Nelson Sessler, and his girlfriend, Annalisa Raimondo. What started out as a harmless affair turned deadly and led to a murder. On November 8, 2002, at approximately 12:19 p.m., police received a frantic 911 call reporting a violent incident at the home of Annalisa Raimondo in Stamford, Connecticut. When officers arrived, they were met with a horrific scene. Annalisa's lifeless body lay near the entrance of her condo, brutally stabbed multiple times in a chaotic struggle. Sheila Davalu was born on May 11, 1969, in Iran. In the mid-1970s, her family emigrated to the United States, seeking new opportunities. Sheila pursued her education at Stone Brook University, where she earned a degree in biochemistry. Following her graduation, she took a position as a research scientist at Purdue Pharma in Stamford, Connecticut. Her professional life flourished, but it would later intersect with personal turmoil that would have significant implications in her future. Sheila Davalu married Farid Masavi, but their relationship deteriorated when Sheila began an affair with Paul Christos, a fellow graduate student she met while attending New York Medical College. The affair ultimately led to their divorce. After her marriage ended, Sheila started a new relationship with Nelson Seltzer while working at Purdue Pharma. This affair would become pivotal in the unfolding events surrounding Annalisa Raimondo, who was dating Nelson at the time of her murder. The dynamics of these relationships created a complex web of jealousy and rivalry that would later be scrutinized during the investigation into Annalisa's death. In the days leading up to November 8, 2002, tensions began to get high due to the complicated relationships involving Sheila Davalu, Nelson Seltzer, and Annalisa Raimondo. Sheila was dating Nelson at the time, who was now in a relationship with Annalisa. Things between Nelson and Annalisa began to get serious. This left Sheila with nothing but jealousy and resentment against Lisa, who she saw as a romantic rival, and the hurdle between her and Nelson's relationship. On the morning of the murder, Annalisa was at her Stamford condo, unaware that her life was about to be tragically cut short. On November 8, 2002, Annalisa Raimondo was brutally attacked in her home. The assailant, later identified as Sheila Davalu, entered the condo with clear intent. Evidence suggests that Sheila confronted Annalisa inside the residence. During the attack, Annalisa suffered multiple stab wounds, inflicted with a knife. The wounds were primarily located on her face, neck, and chest, indicating a violent struggle. The murder unfolded rapidly. Witnesses reported hearing screams coming from the condo. The chaotic nature of the attack suggested a personal motive rather than a random act of violence. After the stabbing, Sheila fled the scene, leaving Annalisa's body near the entrance of her home. The discovery of Annalisa's body came later that day when a neighbor visited her condo and found her unresponsive. The friend immediately called emergency services, reporting a possible homicide. Upon arrival, police found Annalisa deceased, surrounded by signs of a violent struggle that would lead them to launch an extensive investigation into her death. When police arrived at the scene, they found Annalisa, 32 years old, brutally beaten and stabbed to death inside her apartment, which had been ransacked. The absence of forced entry suggested that Annalisa likely knew her killer. Blood was found throughout the apartment, including the bathroom sink, indicating a frenzied attack. Following the discovery of the body, Nelson Seltzer was notified by the police about Annalisa's death and arrived at the scene. His calm demeanor raised suspicions among investigators. Police quickly began investigating his alibi. He was confirmed to be at work during the time of Annalisa's murder, supported by CCTV footage. During the investigation, witnesses reported seeing a man named Gary Riley near Annalisa's apartment on the day of the murder. However, after further questioning and examination of evidence, Gary was cleared of any involvement. Despite these leads, investigators lacked sufficient evidence to charge anyone with the crime. The case remained open as they continued to gather information and analyze potential suspects. In March 2003, Sheila Davalu stabbed her husband, Paul Christos, during what she later claimed was an accident while playing a game that involved handcuffs and blindfolds. On March 22nd, Sheila introduced Paul to a guessing game where he was restrained and unable to see. During this game, objects were touched against him, creating an atmosphere of playful intimacy. However, the situation escalated on March 23rd, when Sheila stabbed Paul twice with a paring knife inside their Pleasantville, New York condominium. After the initial stabbing, Sheila hesitated to call 911 for medical assistance. Eventually, she drove Paul to the hospital, but stopped in a secluded area behind the facility where she attempted to stab him again. Paul was found in the hospital parking lot with multiple stab wounds. He underwent emergency surgery and survived the attack. Following the incident, Sheila was charged with attempted murder, while she maintained that the stabbings were accidental and a part of the game they were playing. After the stabbing of Paul Christos, police began to uncover inconsistencies between Sheila Davalou's account of events and Paul's version. Sheila claimed that the incident was an accident during a game. However, investigators noted discrepancies in her statements that raised suspicions about her narrative. Further complicating matters, it was revealed that after stabbing Paul, Sheila had called Nelson Seltzer instead of contacting 911 for immediate medical assistance. This decision drew the attention of law enforcement, as it suggested a potential motive and connection to her previous relationship with Nelson. On February 19, 2004, Sheila was convicted of attempted murder against Paul Christos and sentenced to 25 years without parole at Bedford Hills Maximum Security Prison. Following Sheila's conviction for attempted murder, police revisited the unsolved case of Annalisa Raimondo. Public statements made by Annalisa's father, Dr. Renato Raimondo, played a significant role in refocusing the investigation on Sheila. He publicly expressed his belief that Sheila was responsible for his daughter's murder, stating, "I believe she is the one who killed my daughter." This assertion prompted investigators to examine the evidence from Lisa's case more closely. They began to connect the dots between Sheila's violent behavior towards Paul and her potential motive for Annalisa's murder, leading them to consider Sheila as the prime suspect in the earlier homicide. The investigation into both cases would ultimately reveal critical evidence linking Sheila to the murder of Annalisa Raimondo. Following Sheila Davalou's conviction for the attempted murder of her husband, police began to link her case to the unsolved murder of Annalisa Raimondo. Investigators revisited the evidence from both cases, focusing on the timeline and relationships involved. The examination revealed that Sheila had been in a romantic relationship with Nelson Seltzer, who was dating Annalisa at the time of her murder. This connection raised questions about Sheila's motives and potential involvement in Annalisa's death. The investigation into the attempted murder had already uncovered Sheila's violent tendencies, leading authorities to consider whether these behaviors extended to her actions towards Annalisa. As they pieced together the evidence, investigators found that Sheila's obsession with Nelson could have played a significant role in both incidents. This critical link prompted law enforcement to intensify their scrutiny of Sheila's past and her relationship dynamics. On November 6, 2007, nearly 5 years after Annalisa Raimondo's murder, Sheila Davalou was arrested for the crime. At the time of her arrest, she was still serving her sentence for the attempted murder of Paul Christos. The circumstances surrounding her arrest involved a thorough investigation that connected her to Annalisa's death through DNA evidence and other forensic findings. As police compiled their case against Sheila, they presented compelling evidence that suggested she had the motive and opportunity to commit the murder. The arrest marked a significant turning point in the investigation, as it linked Sheila directly to a crime that had long remained unsolved. Law enforcement officials were now prepared to move forward with charges related to Annalisa Raimondo's murder, setting the stage for a high-profile trial in the years to come. In the lead-up to Sheila Davalou's trial for the murder of Annalisa Raimondo, several pretrial motions were filed concerning the admissibility of evidence. One significant motion was related to uncharged misconduct stemming from Sheila's attempted murder of her then-husband Paul Christos. The prosecution sought to introduce this evidence to establish a pattern of behavior that would illuminate Sheila's motive and intent regarding the murder of Annalisa. The court ultimately ruled in favor of the prosecution, determining that the evidence was relevant and critical for understanding the context of Sheila's actions. The judge emphasized that while the evidence of uncharged misconduct could evoke strong emotions, it did not unduly prejudice the jury. The court noted that Sheila's manipulative behavior and her attempted murder of Christos were indicative of her obsessive nature, which was central to the prosecution's case. By allowing this evidence, the court aimed to provide jurors with a comprehensive view of Sheila's psychological state and motivations leading up to Annalisa's murder. This ruling set the stage for a trial focused on uncovering the complexities of Sheila's relationships and her potential motives for committing such a violent act. The trial of Sheila Davalou was structured as a jury trial and lasted over 2 weeks. Sheila made the significant decision to represent herself, foregoing legal counsel in favor of direct control over her defense. This choice allowed her to confront witnesses and present her case in her own words, but it also placed the burden of navigating legal procedures and courtroom rules entirely on her shoulders. The prosecution presented a compelling case, arguing that Sheila Davilou's motive for murdering Annalisa Raimondo stemmed from an obsessive desire to rekindle her relationship with Nelson Seltzer. They contended that Sheila's jealousy over Nelson's relationship with Annalisa drove her to commit the crime. The prosecution emphasized the emotional turmoil and rivalry that characterized the love triangle, painting a picture of a woman whose fixation on Seltzer led to drastic and violent actions. In their arguments, the prosecution described the murder as cold and calculated. They asserted that Sheila had planned the attack, highlighting the premeditated nature of her actions. This characterization was supported by evidence that suggested Sheila had been stalking Annalisa and plotting to eliminate her as her rival. By framing the murder in this way, the prosecution aimed to convey the jury that Sheila's actions were not impulsive, but rather the result of deliberate choice fueled by obsession. To further strengthen their case, the prosecution introduced unchanged misconduct evidence related to Sheila's attempted murder of Paul Christos, her then-husband. This evidence illustrated a pattern of behavior that was critical in establishing Sheila's motive and intent. The court had already ruled this evidence to be relevant to understanding Sheila's psychological state and her propensity for violence, thereby allowing the jury to see a broader context for her actions. The prosecution argued that these incidents were not isolated, but part of a larger pattern of manipulative and dangerous behavior. They posited that Sheila's history of violence against Christos indicated a willingness to resort to extreme measures when faced with emotional challenges or perceived threats to her desires. This pattern was essential in demonstrating how deeply ingrained Sheila's obsession with Seltzer was, and how it ultimately culminated in Annalisa's murder. Overall, the prosecution's arguments were structured to create a narrative of obsession, manipulation, and premeditated violence, aiming to convince the jury of Sheila's guilt in the first-degree murder of Annalisa Raimondo. To back up their claims, the prosecution had a key piece of evidence. First up, the prosecution presented compelling forensic evidence that Sheila's DNA was found on a sink handle in Annalisa's apartment. This critical piece of evidence established a direct link between Sheila and the crime scene, suggesting that she had been present during the murder. The forensic analysis indicated that the DNA was consistent with Sheila's profile, which became a focal point for the prosecution's argument. The next piece of evidence presented by the prosecution was an analysis of the 911 call made on the 8th of November 2002, after Annalisa's murder. A voice recognition expert testified that Sheila was the caller who alerted police to Annalisa's home. The analyst indicated a 68% accuracy match between Sheila's voice and the caller, which the prosecution argued was significant enough to support their case. This evidence suggested that Sheila may have been trying to deflect suspicion away from herself by luring authorities to the scene. Apart from two key pieces of evidence, the state prosecutors also had a couple of testimonies lined up against Sheila Davilou. First up was Paul Christos, Sheila's ex-husband. He provided testimony about his troubling marriage with Sheila, detailing violent incidents, including his own stabbing at her hands during a game involving handcuffs and a blindfold, for which Sheila was already serving a 25-year sentence. His testimony highlighted Sheila's capacity for violence and manipulation, painting a picture of a woman who resorted to extreme measures when faced with emotional turmoil. Next up to the witness box was the man for whom the entire tragedy seemed to have taken place. Nelson Seltzer testified about his relationship with both women, explaining how he became serious with Annalisa while distancing himself from Sheila. His insights into his interactions with Sheila revealed her obsessive tendencies and provided context for the rivalry that led to Annalisa's murder. Sheila Davilou chose to represent herself during her trial, a decision that allowed her to directly confront witnesses and control the narrative of her defense. This choice was significant, as it meant she would have to navigate the complexities of legal procedures and courtroom decorum without the guidance of an attorney. Sheila's self-representation was a strategic move aimed at asserting her autonomy in the proceedings, but it also placed considerable pressure on her to effectively argue her case against experienced prosecutors. The defense focused on challenging the prosecution's evidence and creating reasonable doubt regarding Sheila's guilt. One of their primary strategies was to question the reliability of the DNA evidence presented by the prosecution. Sheila argued that while her DNA was found on the sink handle, there were numerous ways it could have been contaminated or left there without her being present during the murder, suggesting that the presence of her DNA did not definitely prove she was involved in Annalisa's death. Additionally, Sheila targeted the voice recognition analysis that linked her to the 911 call. She pointed out that the match was only 68% accurate, stating, "They say Harry Connick Jr. and Frank Sinatra sound alike," attempting to cast doubt on the validity of this evidence. Sheila emphasized that without clear identification or stronger forensic evidence directly tying her to the act of murder, there remained significant uncertainty about her culpability. Furthermore, Sheila introduced alternative suspects based on evidence found at the crime scene. She highlighted a blue contact lens discovered in Annalisa's hair, arguing that it indicated someone else could have been involved in the murder. Sheila also referenced witnesses who claimed to have seen a man and a woman arguing outside Annalisa's apartment around the time of the murder, suggesting that these individuals should be considered as potential suspects. During cross-examinations, Sheila focused on questioning Paul Christos and Nelson Seltzer to identify inconsistencies in their testimonies. She aimed to undermine their credibility and highlight any contradictions that could support her defense. First up was Paul's turn. During his testimony, Sheila confronted Paul about his account of their marriage and his stabbing incident. At one point, when asked by prosecutors to reveal his scars from the stabbing, Sheila broke down emotionally in court, but later attempted to deflect by making a joke about her emotional response. Sheila sought to establish that Paul had previously described their relationship as non-violent and loving before the stabbing incident, which she argued contradicted his portrayal of her as a violent person. Then it was Nelson Sessler's turn for the cross-questioning examination. In cross-examining Sessler, Sheila attempted to extract details about his relationship with Annalisa and how it developed after their affair ended. She questioned him about his commitment to Annalisa and whether he had ever expressed doubts about their relationship. Sheila aimed to portray Sessler as someone who may have had motives or reasons for wanting Annalisa out of the picture, thus diverting suspicion away from herself. Throughout these cross-examinations, Sheila had one motive: to create considerable doubt in the jury's mind regarding both witness reliability and the prosecution's narrative. By emphasizing inconsistencies and introducing alternative theories, she aimed to present herself not as a murderer, but as a victim of circumstances caught in a complex web of relationships. After the conclusion of the trial, the jury began their deliberations, which lasted a day and a half, following the closing arguments from both prosecution and defense. During this time, jurors focused intently on the DNA evidence presented by the prosecution, as well as its implications for Sheila Davilou's guilt. The presence of Sheila's DNA on the sink handle in Annalisa Raimondo's apartment was a critical point of discussion among jurors, who weighed its significance against the defense's claims of contamination and alternative explanations. The jury also considered the voice recognition analysis that linked Sheila to the 911 call made on the day of Annalisa's murder. Although Sheila's defense attempted to undermine this evidence by arguing its reliability, jurors were tasked with determining whether the prosecution had established a strong enough case to provide Sheila's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. On February 10, 2012, the jury reached their verdict. After deliberating for a day and a half, they found Sheila Davilou guilty on first-degree murder of the death of Annalisa Raimondo. The account was met with a mix of emotions in the courtroom, particularly from Annalisa's family, who had attended every day of the trial. The verdict marked a significant moment in the case that had drawn considerable public attention and highlighted complex issues surrounding obsession and violence. The conviction set the stage for sentencing proceedings, where Sheila faced potential penalties ranging from 25 to 60 years in prison for her crime. The jury's decision underscored their belief that the evidence presented by the prosecution had convincingly demonstrated Sheila's guilt in this tragic case. The sentencing hearing for Sheila Davilou took place on April 27, 2012, presided over by Judge Richard Comerford. This hearing followed the jury's guilty verdict for first-degree murder, marking a critical point in the legal proceedings. The courtroom was filled with family members and supporters, all awaiting the judge's decision regarding Sheila's fate. During the sentencing phase, the prosecutor made a compelling case for a maximum sentence based on the nature of the crime. They argued that the murder was not only premeditated, but also executed in a particularly brutal manner, emphasizing the violent struggle Annalisa endured before her death. The prosecution sought to convey the severity of Sheila's actions and the need for a sentence that reflected the gravity of taking another person's life. In contrast, the defense argued for a lighter sentence, citing Sheila's mental health issues as a mitigating factor. They presented her troubling background and emotional struggles, suggesting that these factors contributed to her actions. The defense maintained that while Sheila's behavior was unacceptable, it stemmed from deep psychological issues rather than pure malice. Judge Comerford ultimately sentenced Sheila to 50 years in prison for first-degree murder. He noted that this sentence would effectively keep her incarcerated for life, especially given her age at sentencing, 42 years old. When combined with her previous 25-year sentence for attempted murder in New York, her total time in prison amounted to 75 years. The The judge emphasized the cold and calculated nature of the murder during his ruling, referencing the emotional impact on Annalise's family and the community. The trial of Sheila Davalloo attracted significant media coverage, largely due to the dramatic nature of the case and the complex relationships involved. The public's interest was heightened by the sensational aspects of the love triangle and violent crime that unfolded. Following her sentencing, Sheila expressed her intention to appeal the conviction. She believed there were grounds for contesting various aspects of the trial, including the admissibility of evidence and her decision to represent herself. However, the court denied her motion for a temporary stay at execution during her appeal preparations, meaning she would begin serving her sentence immediately. The story of Sheila Davalloo is a tragic tale of love turned to obsession and a mentally unstable individual not being able to regulate their emotions and resorting to violent actions of such a severe nature. What do you think could have been done differently to prevent such a tragic outcome? Do you think the jury made a mistake by not taking into account her mental health issues at the time of sentencing? Regardless of her mental health issues, she did commit 2 severe crimes for which she was rightfully sentenced. Sheila Davalloo is charged and guilty of attempted murder of Paul Christos, convicted in 2004, for which she currently serves a 25-year sentence at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for Women. First-degree murder of Annalisa Raimondo, convicted on February 10, 2012, for which she is serving a 50-year sentence, combining to make a total of 75 years, effectively ensuring she remains incarcerated for life due to her age at sentencing being 42 years.